own college football playoff scenarios. And when I say our own, I really mean our own, like all of us together, because a lot of y'all got at me on Twitter and shot me your most intriguing college football playoff scenarios for this upcoming Selection Sunday. And I want to break down a few of them. And it's funny, whenever we break down these scenarios, I always feel like I'm back in middle school doing long division. Like I'm using like pages of notes. We have yet to do a segment on the college football playoff scenarios where we have only used one sheet of notes. So let's jump right into it. My man, Winged Helmet Wildcat, pretty cool username, got at us with this scenario. He says, what if Iowa beats Michigan, Alabama beats Georgia, Oregon beats Washington, and Louisville beats Florida State? Now, he did not include this in his scenario, but I'm going to go ahead and include this for the sake of keeping this conversation kind of clean. I'm going to go ahead and assume that Texas beats Oklahoma State. Okay, so that would give us the following conference champions. You'd have a Big Ten multiple loss champ in Iowa. You would have an SEC one-loss champ in Bama. You'd have a Pac-12 one-loss champ in Oregon. You would have an ACC multiple loss champ in Louisville. And you would have a Big 12 one-loss champ in Texas. So I think we can kind of assume here safely, Bama's in, Oregon's in, Texas is in. Who gets that fourth spot? We'll go to the one-loss bank here and kind of look at what we got. We have 3 one-loss non-conference champions. You got Georgia, you got Michigan, you got Washington. So the first thing that my mind goes to is resume. How does the resume shake up? If we're freezing ranked wins, which I think the committee is, you have Georgia with 4 ranked wins. You have Michigan with 2 ranked wins, but they're both in the top 10. 2 top 10 wins, one of those on the road at Penn State. Then you have Washington sitting there with 4 ranked wins, one of them being a top 10 win over Oregon. So the way that I'm looking at this thing, you probably give Michigan some extra juice with the 2 top 10 wins, but not as many ranked wins. Georgia and Washington have the same number of ranked wins. So the way that I'm looking at this, I think the resumes are pretty similar. Like I don't see anything that jumps out to me there resume-wise where I'm like, yes, this team deserves to be in. So we go to my personal favorite and what I think deserves the most attention and how we do our nothing but ball poll. What happens with the eye test? And the eye test has told us, the committee has told us rather about the eye test that they like Georgia. Georgia's undefeated right now. Michigan's undefeated right now. I think the resumes right now are pretty comparable. We're assuming both teams lose. I think Georgia has the better loss, to be clear, over Michigan. I think Washington, their 4 ranked wins are great, but going back to the eye test again, Washington's undefeated, Georgia's undefeated. Georgia has a spot, 2 spots rather, ahead of Washington. So going back to the eye test, what the committee has told us, I think Georgia gets that 4th spot. Now, if we're going to talk about the eye test, I think there is also something to be said for how these teams look on conference championship weekend. Like and I think it goes back to Georgia and Washington, to be clear. I mean, I think the loss that Michigan would take to a team outside the top 10 in Iowa would be too much, and also the number of ranked wins would be too much to allow them to get in. So I think it's between Georgia and Washington. And if Georgia just somehow shows up in Atlanta, and I don't know, man, like they wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and they just somehow, some way slip on the banana peel, and Alabama throttles them in Atlanta, which again, we would be surprised by. We are not predicting. But Washington goes out there and loses by a field goal in overtime against Oregon. That would be a tricky scenario. Maybe that's the scenario where Washington finds their way in. But all things being equal, if that were to be the way it shook out, I would take Georgia as that 4th team. Eye test, the way the roster's built. Heck, whether we want to bake it in or not, or whether we think it's going to happen or not, I think the committee would have to at least have a little bit of subconscious Georgia bump in there. Like, are we really leaving out the back-to-back national champs? Everyone, what is it now, 29 in a row, something crazy like that? Are we really leaving them out? That's the way that I think they would approach it, and that's what I think would happen. Make sure you're subscribed if you're watching the show right now. We appreciate y'all so much. We appreciate y'all being dialed in. Also, if you're watching live, go ahead and like the video. Thank you so much for that. Let's keep on moving. Scenario 2 now is from our guy, Jared Stidham. Now, I don't think this is Jarrett Stidham, not the former Baylor and Auburn quarterback, rather, but he got at us and said he's got Louisville over Florida State in the ACC title game. He's got Georgia, his words, not ours, mauling Bama. So mauling to me probably falls somewhere around the range of 2 scores. We'll say 2 touchdowns. Let's say for the sake of this conversation, Georgia beats Bama by 14. Okay? Then he's got Oklahoma State beating Texas. This is where chaos starts to go down, y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that Oregon wins the Pac-12 based on what he gave us here in his top 4, and Michigan wins the Big Ten. Again, based on his top 4, because his top 4 has Michigan, Georgia, Oregon, and Washington. Would that be the way it shakes out? I don't know. The committee gave us a little wink last night, I think, when they put Ohio State there in the top 6. They love their resume, y'all. I'm just saying. So we go to the one-loss bank. And I say one-loss bank. Y'all remember in elementary school where it would be like a Mad Lib or it would be a crossword puzzle or whatever, and you would have like a little word bank? This is the same concept, but college football teams with one loss, the one-loss bank, just so we're all tracking there. In the one-loss bank, you would have Washington, one-loss non-conference champ. You would have Florida State, a one-loss non-conference champ. That's it, right? Oh, wait a second. Ohio State, just chilling out, watched the games from home, probably, had a workout or two in during the week just to kind of stay fresh and stay ready in case something were to happen just like this. With those 3 teams, going back to resume, I think they're pretty similar. We already talked about Washington and the 4 ranked wins. Florida State, God bless them, that loss to Louisville, I think would be detrimental to their college football playoff aspirations. And some of this is on Florida State for losing that game. Some of it's just like, hey, the ACC as a whole didn't really provide enough juice. So you got that top 5 win over LSU. You got a top 20 win over Duke. Where else are we looking? Ohio State sitting there with 2 top 10 wins and their only loss coming to a top 3 team in the country on the road by 1 score. So we go to the eye test. And again, the Oregon eye test, I think, would matter against Washington if it's close and Washington loses by a field goal in that same scenario. Maybe Washington gets in. The way that I feel about it, by nature of what Ohio State has already put on paper and the work they did early in the year, getting a top 10 win on the road and getting a top 10 win at home, and the loss that they had, which was so close, I'm not so sure Ohio State wouldn't be that 4th team. I understand they didn't even play for the conference championship, and I understand the way they looked against Michigan, and I understand the concerns around some of the times that Ohio State has looked pretty human. I think if Washington were to go out there and not cover the spread, and the committee's not looking at the spread, just so we're all clear, but let's just say that Oregon goes out there and, to use Jared Stidham's words, mauls Washington. Let's say they beat them by 14. Let's say they beat them by 20. If that happens, I think Ohio State would be that team that gets in. I think that would be a snapshot that would be tough for the committee to overcome, and I don't think you put a team that just got blown out into the college football playoff. So that's the way that I would look at that, and yeah, that would be a little bit wild. That would be a little bit wild. That's how this segment always goes. Things just get weird when we talk about the college football playoff in these scenarios. Going back to that other scenario really quick, or the other part of that scenario really quick, let's say Washington does lose close, and they do find themselves in the college football playoff. Just to explore this for a second, if you had 2 Pac-12 teams in the college football playoff before they blew the conference up, or we're assuming they're going to blow the conference up, that would just be college football poetry, would it not? Also would be a pretty good look for the Big Ten, as they would have 3 of those 4 teams, more or less, with Oregon and Washington both headed to the Big Ten next season, plus Michigan. So that would be wild, but nonetheless, that's what we think would happen. Let's get to the last one here. College football playoff scenario number 3. And this is a scenario that we've seen a couple of times here. So many of y'all send this to us. We appreciate that. Here is the doomsday scenario, if you will. We'll put doomsday in quotes. Michigan is undefeated, win the Big Ten. So they do what they're supposed to do. They beat Iowa. Florida State, they beat Louisville. Okay, they're undefeated. They're in the college football playoff. Both those spots are locked up. Going back to that one-loss bank. Now, the difference with this one-loss bank is all 3 of these teams are conference champions. So chalk holds in the teams that are favored, and they get it done. So Oregon, they beat Washington, one-loss conference champ from the Pac-12. Texas, they beat Oklahoma State, one-loss conference champ from the Big 12. Then Alabama, well, I guess I shouldn't have said favorite. Alabama, the underdog in the SEC title game, they beat Georgia. So you have a one-loss SEC champ. What do we do now? We go to the resumes. We take a look. Oregon would have 3 top 20 wins, a nice little win over number 3 Washington. Texas would have 3 ranked wins. And oh, by the way, the best win in the regular season in the entire country over a team they're up against in Alabama, on the road, double digits, in Tuscaloosa, drop the mic. You got to feel pretty good about your chances if you're Texas here, right? Well, Alabama, they have 3 top 20 wins, plus the best win the entirety of the college football season, beating the number 1 ranked team in the country in Georgia. So what I think would happen versus what I think should happen, I want to make this clear. I think that's where we have a little fork in the road. If the nothing but ball poll, we're putting this together, here's what I think should happen. I think it should go to the eye test versus Oregon and Texas, because I don't think you can leave Bama out based on their win over Georgia and kind of having that snapshot for the entire committee to see. Also, there's something to be said for just playing your best ball when it matters. And Alabama has been playing their best ball outside of the weirdness that is the Iron Bowl the last few weeks. Okay, now again, the Iron Bowl, we kind of put that in a separate pile based on the rivalry aspect of it, based on it being at Jordan-Hare, all that. Okay, but if you beat Georgia, I don't have any questions about Alabama being a top 4 team in the country. Now, I go back to the eye test between Oregon and Texas because I think Oregon throttling the number 3 team in the country should hold some weight. And Texas, depending on how they look against Oklahoma State, I think that should matter. Like, if Texas walks it off against a 9-3 Oklahoma State team by a field goal, and Oregon, again, like I said, blows past a top 3 team in Washington, you know, like, do we need to overthink this too much with the resume? This is why we lean on the eye test with the nothing but ball poll. I think if Oregon and Texas played tomorrow, I think Oregon would win. That's not me hating on Texas. That's not me hating on Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian. I think what they've done has been tremendous. I think they'll be great in the SEC when that time comes. But I think Oregon, avenging their only loss of the season too, it'd be hard for me to keep them out. Because in my mind, they've kind of taken care of that one loss, and I would put them in the undefeated category. So that's what I think should happen. That's what we would do. Now, unfortunately, we are not a part of the committee. So what would happen? I think Texas is in, and I think Bama is in. Because both of those wins should hold some weight, and they do hold some weight. And as good as Oregon has been to this point in the season, as much as the committee is telling us, hey, we love Oregon, we love the eye test, I think Texas handling business and their win over Bama boosts them, and I think Bama beating Georgia would boost them. So is it fair? Is it what we agree with? I would stand on the table and say Oregon needs to be in the college football playoff. But again, I think the committee would put Texas in and put Bama in. Now, what I hope happens is we get to have this conversation on Sunday morning before the rankings come out, and we get to do like a college football rankings prediction because we'll have more data then on the eye test. What I think will happen is this will play itself out. I think we'll feel pretty much all in lockstep by the time these rankings come out, and we'll have a good gauge for these top 4, much like it has been every single year. But regardless, we'll talk about it. We'll give you our thoughts when these rankings do drop, and we'll have a good time as we keep on rolling now. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.